Hello everybody, welcome to the Patriot Show. I'm your host, Anthony Stephen Malone. Got a very special guest again in our studio, Moreno, author, Vietnam combat veteran and former LAPD police officer. This is the second part of his interview. On this one, we will be focusing on his time, which is an incredible story, in the Los Angeles Police Department. Hello, Al, how are you doing?
Wonderful to be back on your show again. I really enjoyed your format. You're running a hell of a podcast here, and I've certainly done a lot of them, but I really enjoyed. It probably has a lot to do with your background, so we were just both on the same page.
Yeah. No, it's the public response from your first interview went through the roof. Yeah, we were not expecting that, but everything's been 100% positive, and people were really interested, and people were asking us this morning when was part 2 coming out as well. So here we go. This is part 2. Part 1 was a lot of your background and the time you spent in Vietnam. We then ended part 1 when you returned to the United States. Would you like to pick up the story from there, please?
Sure. I obviously, want to speak about, as you were just stating, that this interview here is about the book that was recently published, which is LA's Last Street Cop.
Yeah.
And it's doing, I'm really excited how it's doing on Amazon. 8 of 10 reviews are 5-star. And it's continuing that, and I'm really happy with it. But I think to answer your question is that when I returned from Vietnam, obviously I wanted to go full press on attaining my childhood dream of becoming a Los Angeles police officer. And I think I mentioned to you in the last interview where it first just kind of like came into my head. And it was in 1954 when I was diagnosed with that debilitating, crippling disease for 4 years. And the doctor asked me, I was like, second grader. He says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I just bumptiously said, "I want to be a policeman." And he just kind of like drew back, and I wasn't cowed. Normally children are when they see a doctor, but this was a splendid doctor from Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. And so I started the arduous process of doing the impossible with all the difficulties and problems that I had that I knew I was going to face when I finally got on the department. And like I mentioned the last time, just to bring it into it, after I applied in August the 4th, 1975 to get onto the Los Angeles Police Department, I wasn't hired till August of 75. So it took 5 years, and I overcame 9 disqualifications, and the rest was history.
Okay, so can you tell a little bit about, because you're going back in time a little bit, can you tell us about the training when the first day you turned up at the academy? Can you tell us what your thoughts were?
Sure. It was it's a paramilitary sort of structure. The academy was recognized as one of the finest academies in the United States. At that time when I went through, the academy was only 4 months long. Seemed much longer. Today it's 7 months long, where they've gotten into other kind of socio-economical, tutoring to the newer officers. But you went through learning the penal codes, the evidence code, the health and safety code, the penal code, the vehicle code, business profession code, all the case law. A lot of there was so much. There's 26 codes in the state of California, of which we basically deal with about 7 of them. Case law and the sort of training of firearms training with our worthless 38 that we had at the time. We also used you had the 12-gauge Ithaca shotgun, which was a Dragon Slayer. And there was role modeling, like how to handle family disputes, neighbor disputes, boyfriend-girlfriend disputes. Then there was the PT. And back then, that was an era where we were allowed to use the restraining, the carotid, the chancery, or the bar arm. They call them chokeholds. And that was something that in the escalation of when you deal with somebody, if it gets to where you're actually in some cases fighting for your life, then you would apply one of those 3 holds. And then the academy's 20 weeks long, and on the 10th week, you go on your first ride along for 1 week. And they send you out to what used to be one of the 18 geographical divisions. Now it's 21. And I was fortunate enough to go to Wilshire Division, which wasn't the hottest division. When I say the hottest, I mean with the most calls for service and crime, but Wilshire was up there. And so for 4 Saturdays, you did that. And so they put you in a car with a couple of guys that have been on the job, seasoned street cops. And the 2 officers, Brophy and Wilder, I was working 7A77. That was the call sign for a car in Wilshire, the vehicle that we worked in Wilshire Division. And it was insane. The radio calls were coming out. It wasn't a computer thing like today. They were coming out and each division listens to 2 other divisions. So at the same time, you got to be able to pick or hear when your call comes up. And then they give you 3 calls. Handle these 3 calls. You're done with those. Handle these 3 calls. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't make any arrests, you can handle up into 25 calls. And half of them are family disputes, neighbor disputes, that sort of thing. And that very first night in that black and white with the Brophy and Wilder. By the way, when they looked at me, I was 29. So they looked at me and they're going, you know, you're not one of the kids. He goes, have you been in the services? I was in the Marine Corps and served as a fire team leader. He says, okay, don't worry about all this bullshit. We're not going to treat you like a boot. Just do what we tell you to do and observe, and we're going to be good. So it worked out really well. So right around 10 o'clock, after shifting back and forth, going, you know, officer needs help calls, backup calls, traffic stops, radio calls. It's just, there wasn't a minute of rest. And of course, we didn't get code 7, which is lunch. You never did. So you would put in this little chit. We called it a greenie, and for your 45 minutes overtime. And that was just normal. Somehow if you were able to manage and stop, you'd get a hamburger or something like that on the run. But a hotshot came over the air. A hotshot is going to be a code 3 call, red lights and siren. It's an emergency call. And the way it starts is that from that radio going 100 miles an hour, all of a sudden it stops and you hear these beep, beep, beep. That tells everybody in the entire city that one of those 18 geographical divisions is going to get a code 3 call, life and death. And so we got the call. 7A77, 211 in progress, which is robbery. Your call is code 3. So here goes a siren, and Brophy reaches down and gets that Ithaca and pumps around in it. And these guys, and we're going like, 50, 60 miles an hour through traffic. It was just so exhilarating. I mean, and I was in the back seat with his brand new uniform, shiny badge, But it is. I wasn't like one of the 21-year-old kids or something like that, and I hadn't been in the service, so I was good to go. To make kind of a long story short, what it was a good 211, and it was a Kentucky Fried Chicken on it was on Pico and Wilshire, which was one of the African American communities in Wilshire Division. And so when we got there, we were going so fast that it was like I said, a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and we hit the right front wheel against this tall curb and collapsed the tire. And tactically, it wasn't a good place to be because the side door employee entrance was just on the other side of the sidewalk. So Brophy and Wilder get out of their car, armed with their shotguns, 38. I barricade myself behind the right rear door, which is closest to the door, and the suspect comes out. And he had a 15-year-old little girl with his arm around her throat, and a 357 Magnum 6-inch, looked like an elephant gun, to her temple. And he was screaming at us to give us the keys to our car. Well, that wasn't going to happen. I was the closest to him, and I had a perfect headshot. But half of his face was about maybe 5 feet away. And I didn't just cap around. It had to be a slow, deliberate shot because it was just, the little girl's head was right here. Yeah. I was afraid that he was going to blow her brains out. So I had to do what I had to do. So I drew a bead right above his eyeball and slowly brought the hammer back. Basically the same training that I had in the Marine Corps brass: breathe, relax, aim, slap, slack, squeeze, boom. And just before the hammer went down, boom, I hear this shot coming from my left, and it was a couple of old-time coppers. They were working a J car, a juvenile car, and they just walked up, kind of assessed it, and going, boom. And I don't know how they made that shot. It must have been 20 feet, 25 feet away, and they shot him right through the mouth. And I remember as the bullet hit him, his face kind of like went into a wind tunnel. And of course, it was a splat of, everything going all over the place. The little girl torqued away, hit the deck, and he raised the gun to shoot us, at which time 5 officers fired. And what was really astonishing is that he didn't fall down. He took 4 shotgun blasts to the trunk area, and God only knows how many bullets. And he finally went down. The other guy says, I'm going to surrender. So he coughed up the 4, hostages, and we took him into custody. And that was the first time ever in a black and white. So I got the accelerated course on the realities from second to second of what may happen to you. Yeah. And so I went back to the academy, and of course we all discussed what we did that Saturday. And obviously my story was like, oh my God, everybody else had some pretty good stories. But so when I graduated, you don't get a choice. You get 4 choices of where you want to go, which division, but half the time you don't get it. But anyhow, I was sent to Venice Division. Now they call it Pacific. And it's one of the slower divisions. It's where some of the guys kind of want to go and just kind of like, it's going to be madness, like at South Bureau 77th, shooting Newton or Rampart or Hollywood, that's going crazy. And so I says, well, I was disappointed I didn't want to go to 77th, which was the hottest division. And, but, I was a probationer, so you just do what you want to do or what you got to do. And I did meet a couple of officers there that were just really great teachers. And that's where I learned basically a lot of narcotics arrests, because I was working the Oakwood area, which was the hottest spot in the entire division. And it was kind of like a mini South Central, because it was like about 98% African American. So there was a lot of problems in the community. And I mean, heroin was extremely popular back then, phencyclidine or PCP, a really cheap high, and of course, marijuana. Yeah. So I made so many arrests under the tutelage of Officer Rich Mesnard, and I made a really good friend there, Ray Hicks. He was working narcotics, an Afro-American, and this guy really knew his dope. And he had also been to Vietnam. So we kind of like, matched up really good. He taught me, him and Mesnard taught me. So I actually qualified as a court expert, expert in the use and sales of heroin, PCP, and marijuana. After I completed my probation, I was wheeled to Hollywood Division. You automatically, after your probation, go. So I went to Hollywood Division, And that place was a freakazoid place back in the 70s. I got the best car, which was the most active area, which was on the east side of Hollywood that just bordered Rampart Division. And as God is my witness, every street on Hollywood Boulevard, every street had anywhere from 1 to 2 hoes working it, prostitutes. And it was really a seedy location. They had these little walk-in theaters where they had these porno movies, and it was just a dump back then. We'd always get a laugh when these tourists would come thinking that they were actually going to see a movie star walking down Hollywood Boulevard. I mean, please, you know. But Hollywood was fast, and I really enjoyed it. And that's where I was in my second officer involved shooting. I was working 6827 was the name of our car with an excellent officer, John Gamble. And the call didn't come out over the net at the time. We were southbound on Argyle at Hollywood Boulevard, just 2 blocks from Hollywood and Vine, you know, the very hub of Hollywood. And this citizen came up from my left side and is screaming that there's a man who's got an axe and he's cutting people's heads off, you know, in Hollywood. And we're going, yeah, because we had planned to get off. We had a couple of dates and wanted a couple of pints, right? We're going, it's going to be, you know, what's really funny, you're not thinking about, you know, the awfulness that is going on. You're going, damn, I'm not going to get my pint tonight, you know? Anyhow, we turned westbound, and as we're slowly going down the street, we're looking at all these shops, and their plate glass windows are all blown out, broken. So we're thinking to ourselves, look at all these vandalism, you know, it's going to be one crime report after another. We're going to be there for the next 2 days writing. Well, the suspect wasn't GOA, gone on arrival this time. He was on the north east corner of Hollywood and Cahuenga, 1 block from Hollywood and Vine. About 10 o'clock, and the streets were just jammed with folks on there. So we seen the suspect, and he had a regular axe that you chop a tree down with. And he had his back to us, and he was a male Caucasian, probably about 6 foot, blonde hair down his butt, white t-shirt, white pants. And so my partner Gamble set a call, you know, 6827 requested assistance. We got a 415 man with an axe, a disturbance. And so here comes the blue wave. You can hear it immediately. Red lights and siren, your brother's coming to your aid. And of course, Air 6, the helicopter, you know, and again, it's just kind of like surreal. It's just like something you would see on TV, right?
Yeah.
So I put on my war face, and I walked up to the apex of the northeast corner, and I screamed at him with these vulgarities and my war face. And that was done to defeat his will to fight, to have him basically drop the axe. And it worked 99% of the time. You scare the hell out of the suspect. You make him think you convince him that if he doesn't do what he's going to die. So that's why you use the psychological. Now, the vulgarities are not taught in the academy, but the academy is one thing and out in the street is another thing, right?
Yeah.
So the suspect turns, and he's got his hand up like this here, that axe, and I could see the lights glistening off the head of the axe. And I'm going, oh, shit. So I'm screaming at him, and he doesn't drop the axe. So it's getting, you know, up and up on the game. And for the first time in my life, that never worked. You know, I'm going to scare this guy to dropping the axe or the gun. And he turns and he looks at me, and these are exact words. He says, shoot me. This world is fucked up. Excuse me if that's what he said. God wants me to do this. And immediately I knew that I was going to be able to talk to this unit. I mean, and then I looked at his face, and he had the objective symptoms of a PCP, glassy eyes, and I could smell that odor of ether. I think I was dusted. Oh, crap. So he starts walking across the street, stops on the northwest corner, and there was a Florsheim shoe store behind, but it was closed, which was good because if I had to fire, you're thinking about background, right? So you don't want to hit, just an innocent person. By this time, there was a whole, basically, of police officers around me, and I had my buddy behind me with that 12-gauge Ithaca Gamble, and the citizens are just pushing the officers so they can get a closer look. And then I try to talk to the guy. I says, look, man, just drop the axe. No big deal. It's not that big of a deal. I drop the axe. So at one point, he kind of looked at the crowd, and then I'm calculating, if I don't take him down and he bolts into that crowd and he swings that axe, chops up a few policemen and a few citizens, I'm screwed. Yeah. And I didn't do my job. So I made the decision that if he didn't drop the axe here within the next few moments, that I was going to use deadly force. And then when he was looking, then he looked at me, and then he looked like he was going to bolt to the right. I was ready to fire, and it was going to be a headshot to take him down because the 38s that we had didn't have any knockdown power. It'd have to be a headshot or a heart-lung shot to take him down. He turns and he takes a step and he wants to plant that axe right into my skull. So it's very difficult to put into words, but as opposed to taking that headshot, the real Al Moreno came out, not some ass-kicking cop that wants to cap around in somebody's ass. I moved the firearm down just above his right knee. Boom, shot him in the knee. I could see the fire coming out of the 38. I could feel the buck from the 38 round. And I looked at his leg, and there was a little brown spot, then massive red. The guy didn't even blink his eye. Zero, nothing. So I said, oh, God. So I brought it over to the left, did exactly the same thing, little gray hole, massive red, nothing. I said, I'm going to do it one last time to the right leg again, and if it doesn't go down, I'm going to cancel his ticket. I'm going to put a round right here. Fortunately, the third round took him down. He was struggling and fighting, even after being shot 3 times. And we took him into custody. So it really had never been done by or recorded that an officer did that under those kind of accident circumstances. So one of the supervisors a couple of days later comes up to me and goes, Al, we talked to management, and that was just like, that was insane for you to stick your neck out like that. And we're talking about, actually awarding you the Medal of Valor. But would you take it under the table? I go, what the hell are they talking about? Because they make a big ceremony out of it, right? He goes, well, if we do this and you're in the ceremony, then the papers pick it up and TV picks it up. They're going to basically judge the way you handle it, and you shot the guy in the legs. So any shooting after that, they're going to basically compare it. Well, why didn't he shoot the knife out of the hand, or shoot? He's got an axe or a machete or a firearm. So, and I can understand that. And I says, I don't need any damn award. I just felt really super good that I didn't take this human being's life. Yeah, I stuck my ass out, but it was a lot better than getting the Medal of Valor. So just real quick forward, 17 years later, I come into my flat after work, turn on the telly, walk over to get a cold one, and I hear this flash, man with an axe, and he was shot, and kind of like, even though it was 17 years later and I wasn't on the job anymore, it was the same suspect, Vincent Eric Bell, doing the exact same thing. This time he was shot to death by a female officer, heart-lung shot. It doesn't end there. His roommate, a kid by the name of Blassinger, was shot to death by one of the officers doing the exact same thing that he did. He had the American flag wrapped around an axe, and he was trying to chop people up and took a shotgun blast to the head. So that was kind of, I would say, the highlight of working Hollywood division. Mm-hmm. And from Hollywood, they didn't have a whole lot of gangs there, but they did have the rebels. And there was this gang shooting between the rebels and Canton 14. And the victim was shot 6 times through the legs. Not by design, it's just that's where the bullets ended up. There were 32 calibers, so they weren't lying, they weren't the bigger caliber. Anyhow, I handled it, and I did actually got SID, the guys that work gangs down in Parker Center, the class house, the headquarters of LAPD, brought them in, and we arrested the shooter. And so it was really impressive to this one Detective 3 from downtown. He goes, Al, what you've done here is just really great. We got this guy off the street. He's got a rap sheet, 3 other shootings in his package. And so great job. So anyhow, he called me up and he says a couple of days later that there was this new LAPD specialized unit called OCB Crash. It stands for Operation Central Bureau. Crash is Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. And it was the first time LAPD had ever really put together a specialized gang-related outfit. So the boss was a lieutenant as opposed to a captain. Normally it's a captain. I couldn't figure out to this day how the hell that was. But I went ahead and applied because there was a position open. They handpicked, by the way, 40 officers from the entire department, made up of super cops. The problem is that from the jump, the numbers weren't right. You got 40 super cop officers, but they're working the gang capital of the world. The city of Los Angeles, one of 88 cities in the county of Los Angeles, it's got 450 gangs with well over 50,000 gang members versus 40 super cops. So it just, and as I'm talking to this lieutenant trying to get that job, he had it all wrong. But of course, I wasn't going to say anything. When we were talking, he was asking me about what, my background. I told him that I was raised in the hood. So that went really well for me because I had kind of a generic understanding of the gang life and what have you. And that would be a plus for one of the guys working gangs. But he never addressed, as I was talking to him, he never addressed the big picture. And what I mean by that is that he never mentioned anything about La M, which is the Mexican mafia that runs all the Latin gangs in the United States. He never mentioned the Aryan Brotherhood, which are the white supremacist group. These are prison gangs that basically, they're the bosses of all the white supremacist gangs in the United States. And then the Black Guerrilla family, which basically, is the boss for all the black gangs in the United States. He never mentioned anything about drugs, extortion, human trafficking, counterfeiting, money laundering, the big things. Had the Los Angeles Police Department did it right, they would have started that unit with 200 officers. They would have collaborated with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They would have should have connected with other big cities like Chicago and New York. That would have suppressed this insanity that's going on as we're speaking right now. Yeah. So, by the way, in the United States right now, there's over 1.4 million gang members in the United States. And many of these gangs, like MS-13 and 18th Street, they're transnational now. They're in Canada, some in Western Europe, believe it or not, South and Central America, really, really, really organized. So as you know, I could sit here, it certainly is covered in the book, Allie's Last Street Cop, you know, what we did. But I'm going to really fast forward for you so that, you know, give you an opportunity to ask some questions. But the lieutenant was catching hell from his bosses because the crime rate was still going right through the roof. I mean, we were doing a fabulous job. We were, I mean, you know, working overtime like you have no idea, handling anywhere from 1 to 5 shootings per night. And that doesn't include the stabbings, the muggings, the rat packings, shooting into inhabited dwellings, kidnappings, and rapes. Those are the things that we handled. It was just nuts. If we weren't at work, we were at 210 West Temple Street testifying on the arrest that we were making. And when you handle these shootings one after another, it just doesn't, these are numbers and they just don't affect the public anymore. But, you know, to put it into reality, when you go to these shooting scenes, you know, you go to these where there's a headshot and the head is just, there's pieces of skull and brain tissue all over the place. The amount of blood is just, you can smell it. It's all over the place. Somebody gets hit in the abdomen. They void the 22 feet of their intestines. Then you're dealing with friends and family that are going completely mad, nuts, bat nuts out of their head, and they're screwing up the crime scene and they're tugging at this person that has been blown all to hell. And you see this 1, 2, 3, 4 times a day, every single day. You know, your humanity for this sort of nonsense and all this excuse bullshit just goes right out the door, because we're talking about the survival of human beings, of entire communities that have to lock down.
Yeah.
So at one point, the Lieutenant Lynch is catching hell like from the mayor's office, the city council, chief of police, and it all rolls downhill, as you well know. So what he starts doing is cooking the books. And what I mean by that is that he would write a criterion that made it no longer gang related, because that's all we handled. So unless it got to like, unless somebody screamed out, you know, shuttered out, you know, Planton or Clover or 18th Street or Maravilla or something like that, then it wasn't gang related. If there was no tattoos, not gang related. That was bullshit. And people were dying because of that. So the unit, these super guys that are the cornerstone of integrity, they'd had it. This was just not acceptable. And they actually started transferring out of the unit. So the lieutenant was getting folks into the unit that he could manage. In other words, people that had their heads up where the sun doesn't shine for the lieutenant, that sort of thing. And it lost that, but I wasn't going anywhere. I was leading the unit in felony arrest. I was leading the unit in gun seizures. And these weren't radio calls where you roll up. And at one point, I recall that our deployment period was 28 days. And 13 of those days in a row, from hunting and knowing who to stop, I arrested a gang member with a gun. And on the 13th day, I arrested 2 separate gang members, 2 incidents. One with a 45, and then we booked him, did all the reports, went back out. I got another guy with a 45. The next day, I was called in the office by my two of my 4 supervisors, Ray Nutzel and Mike Wynn. We had 4. And they just told my partner, wait out in the hall. And they go, you know, look, Al, you're making us look really good, that we're motivating our troops. But you're too hot. Those are his exact words. Yeah. Somebody's going to get you, bro. Murphy's Law is going to surface its ugly head. You're going to take a round of the head. You're done. We want to offer, we can't order you. We would like you to get out of the field for a couple of deployment periods, just work crash 90, handling the radio and notifications or what have you. And it was a separate unit. So we had our own office. And he says, call one of your girlfriends over to just kind of hang with you, take an extended lunch. I mean, I was just shocked. Where have you heard something like that before? It was just, to this day, I kind of look at them and I just, it kind of strikes you in the heart for them to actually do something like that. It was just really wonderful. Of course, I told them, hell no. So I went back out and I was protecting the widows and orphans, right? So at one point, the lieutenant calls me into his office and he says, Officer Moreno, you're not abiding by this new criterion. And I just looked at him and I said, it's all a bunch of bullshit. You know it, I know it. And so we went to war. But I was right.
Yeah. No, you're right.
So about 2 weeks later, he calls me in his office. He says, you've been administratively transferred from OCB crash to Northeast Patrol. I'm back in the black and white, right? Well, unbeknownst to me, they can't really just do that. You do have some rights, but I wasn't aware of it at first. I was just so angry. Then I hooked up at Northeast. I was kind of like, I wasn't going to let that affect my police work. So I started tearing it up in Northeast. And Northeast had the avenues and several other different gangs there. And so I was really, when I had free time, because it wasn't that busy, I was making a lot of arrests, a lot of gun seizures, and I hooked up with one of the best street coppers that I ever met. And he became my best friend, Officer Bill Wong. And he wasn't kind of like a regular, Asian gentleman, kind of slight build with a little bit of an accent. And you kind of look at him, maybe sometimes could look at him a little different. Bill, he went to Fremont High School, which was all black. Bill was about 5'11", 190 pounds, and there wasn't an ounce of fat, and he was a martial arts expert. And when he spoke, it was just like you were listening to one of the brothers, man. He had that, and this guy had some command presence, and he and I just got married immediately. We worked, and we were just tearing it up. Yeah. And there's a really horrid, tragic ending to that. And I'll talk about that when I'm done with this overview. But anyhow, Bill told me, Al, you have rights, and you can actually go to the Protective League and you can grieve it. And there's 3 levels of, in case you don't make the first one. And I met it at the first level. And so I got my job back at Crash. My goal was I had to become a policeman 3, so I was waiting to take the test. It's a 2-striper because I was going to go to Metro. Metro is the Dragon Slayers of Los Angeles Police Department, and that's where SWAT works out of. And all they do, they don't handle radio calls. They just go from division to division, whoever's having a problem with a rapist or robberies or whatever, and that was my goal. And then eventually, maybe within 2 to 3 years, get on SWAT, and that's where I was going to stay for the rest of my life. That would have been the perfect fit for me. So when I won the grievance, of course, the lieutenant went completely mad dog, postal, nuts, pissed off. He calls me in his office and he just looks at me and goes, "You're on the menu." But I said to myself, well, screw you. I didn't tell him that, but I wasn't ever going to do anything to get myself in trouble or give him a hook to do me. Well, I said, I better talk to somebody that can watch my back. So I went to the bureau commander, and he's the boss of all of Central Bureau, Hollaback, Rampart, Newton, Central, Northeast Division. And they call it whistleblowing today. They didn't call it back then, and there were no whistleblower rights. And I just told him the whole story. The kind of was Mark Croker, a good guy for upper management. And he says, Al, we know what's going on here. All the other divisions captains are screaming at us that, that Crash is just pawning off their duty and making patrol officers do what you're supposed to be doing, taking their time out for calls for service. And they were like really pissed off. So this is what the commander's telling me. And he goes, Al, let me ask you this. Is there anybody of the force supervisors that'll back you up? And then I said to myself, well, here it goes. I mean, for any one of those supervisors to basically say what I just said, they've just thrown their career under the bus.
Yeah.
But I'll be damned. Both Sergeant Nussel and Wynn went in there and backed me up 100%. I was shocked. They wanted to be lieutenants, but they knew that there was no way in hell they'd ever get that rank for doing what they did, for having the integrity. So they came back after they spoke to him, and they go that Croker was really, really, really happy, and now they was going to be able to do something. There was talk there was going to be a board of inquiry, which is made of staff and above, and heads were going to roll. So just then, I was working homicide and I got beeped up. I was living in Hermosa Beach, the good life. Had an Aston Martin DB6 Superleggero Mark II. Now they're going for anywhere from $400,000 up to $1 million. I got it for $7,900 back then. Right-hand steering. I had a ski boat, 18.5-foot south wind. I was living in Hermosa Beach, which was just like stewardesses, and I was living the life, my dear God. So anyhow, I got beeped up on this drive-by murder. It was over in Northeast Division, where an Avenues gang member cut this kid in half with a sawed-off shotgun, and it was one of the more grisly sorts of sides that I don't have to repeat myself and take a shotgun blast to the tummy. So I knew who this suspect was because I had, heard about the Aguirre family. There were two brothers. It was Arnold and Richard. By the way, Richard, the older brother, became eventually the president of La M in the joint. So these weren't your nickel dime little gangsters. I mean, these were, and Arnold was 15 going on 30. So they drove up to, there was a witness right next to the decedent. And so he told us that this car with three guys came up and they started going back and forth. It was over some kind of a problem that they had in high school. And the victim stood up, 16 years old, and he says, "Come on, man, get out of the car." At which time Aguirre in the left rear of the vehicle brings up a double-barrel shotgun, hits both triggers, blows him right out of one shoe. And this other shooter, Klukinski, he's got a .357 Magnum, and he's got his body halfway out there. And as this kid is tumbling towards the porch of his house there to get inside, he's being shot at with a .357 Magnum. So anyhow, when I get there, and I was working with John Petovich, really super detective. We went to robbery homicide division, which is like the place for all in downtown Los Angeles. And he didn't answer his beep. We didn't have cell phones back then. We had beepers. And this new guy that I didn't know him, he came into the crime scene and introduced himself, and he was the detective too, so he outranked me. And he transferred from Hollywood division. He's working homicide there to OCB Crash. So I'm doing what I've been doing for almost 4 years, and he's like, he seemed a little indignant because I wasn't asking him permission to do this or that, and he was like the senior officer, but he could see that I knew what the hell I was doing. I'd been doing it for 4 years. So we went back to the station. We actually got the name of the shooters from this, which was extremely unusual, by the way. And so we worked on a search warrant, arrest warrants, and at about 4 o'clock in the morning, we served the arrest warrant at the Gary house, and Arnold was in bed, sleeping like a baby. And he had 15-year-old, he had butchered this kid just a few hours before. And he had this serenity little, like he was having wonderful little dreams. Just amazing how these killers are. So I kicked the bed, put the shotgun in his face. We didn't know if he had any firearms under the blankets. You always have to anticipate these things. And so he rolls the blankets down, and we take him into custody. His brother wasn't there. So we took the one main shooter, and we didn't have to interview him because we had a wit that named him. They'll sit right next to the decedent. But this detective, Bernie Skiles, said, no, I want to interview him. Let's get a cop out. I says, man, we don't need a cop out. And I know this guy. I know the family. He isn't going to tell us shit. So let's just, we've been working 28 straight hours. Let's go home, get a little bit of rest, come back, and then we'll, get the other two guys. And he goes, no. We're going to go in there, and I want you to be the main interviewer. Like if I was on, like I was just brand new to all this stuff. And I go, yeah, okay, fine. So I went in there, and it's a small little interview room, and I looked into his black, dead eyes, and he was still feeling this kind of high from that murder. It's kind of like a sexual high. It's a sick ass shit. So I asked him all these questions. He just looked at me and he said, I'm not going to use the language. Basically told me to get fricked, and he laughed. And I said, this is bullshit. I walk out of the room, and Skiles follows me. I says, I told you, man, I know this guy's, let's just book him. Okay, we can do some follow-ups. We don't need the cop out. He's nailed, he's done. So I go, no, we're gonna try one more time, and I want you to play this time, be the bad guy, pound on the table and kick the table and so I'm gonna crap. So we walk back in there, and I start doing eye-to-eye contact and pounding on the table, and he's just within arm's length. And he just said, F you, man, like he wasn't cowed at all. So I got up, I grabbed him by the lapels, like you see on TV, and I push him against the wall, and I make him think that I'm gonna kick his ass, which I'm not, and it's all a game. And then I get him and I sling him towards his chair, and he takes this fall like he fell down, right? And I just throw him out of the room. This is where I was waiting for Skiles to go, you know what, you pissed off Moreno. He says, you're never gonna see daylight for the next 30 years. You've screwed up. No. Skiles comes out, looks at me, and he says, Moreno, you physically assaulted that arrestee under color of authority. And I'm going to the old man with it. And I'm going, oh, dear God. See, he knew that me and the lieutenant were at war. And there was also a Detective 3 spot coming up, which is the head of the detectives for the unit. And he knew that if he rolled me over, this would endear him. And by the way, he did get it, okay, over other detectives that have been there 3 or 4 years, right? So a couple weeks later, I go to the Colorado River with my ski boat and a bunch of coppers and nurses and stews. And I've been going to the river since, for years, right? And we're having the grandest time of all, Colorado River water skiing. And on the second night, we said, let's go over to we were on the California side of the river. Let's go over to the Arizona side. And there's a bunch of these little pubs where you can just moor in your boat right there and go out and have a drink and party down and just have the time of your life. So you had Fox's, Sundance, and Rum Runner. And we were going to all three, just having a great time. We're going to go back and then maybe go for a moonlight cruise after. And I'll be damned that on our first stop, we seen this one kid, Woody. I went to Southgate High School with him 10 years prior, and he comes up and he goes, ow. So we're talking, laughing. He goes, and he had a 23-foot boat. So, he bought everybody around, and he was with a really kind of a strange guy that looked like the police. So he invited us to go bar hopping with him in his boat. So we packed. Our party was 5. 2, 4, 6, no, 7. So we all bunched in his boat, and then we went to this one pub, and I've been going to the river forever. It was called the Moonshine Saloon. I'd never been there before, way down at the end. And so as soon as we walk in the bar, I'm saying to myself, oh shit. It was a hangout for the Aryan Brotherhood. Okay. And there was this one guy sitting there by the bar, 6'3", 250 pounds, didn't have a shirt on. He's got arms big as tree trunks. And the reason he had his shirt on is because he wanted to show off his tattoos and his cuts and slashes and bullet holes. What a badass he was, right? So as we're walking into the bar, half of the, the girls are not cops, but the guys are. And I looked at Dean, this guy that I was with, and I'm going, but by then everybody got drinks. Some people were playing pool, little games. And one of the girls that was with us, a probationer with one of the officers, went and sat down, and this monster goes up to her and he starts talking all these vulgarities and I want to do this. And then Mike Casadas was Hispanic. He looked very Hispanic, very dark. And he says, what are you doing with that effing wetback? And Patty stood up. And so I says, no, we're out of here. So we all start leaving. We did the right thing. Get the hell out of there, right? And as we're leaving, I'm tailing Charlie. And just before I get to the door, Stephen, I feel this vice grip on my shoulder. And I wheeled around like that, and it was Hallam. And he was just raising that tree trunk to take off my head. Well, I went into him like a buzzsaw. But this dude didn't go down. Yeah, all I did was piss him off, right? So I said, I'm a dead man. And then the bar just turned into a gaggle of pool cues, and it was one of the bitchiest fights you've ever seen, bar fights, right? So at one point, I was actually able to kind of squeeze around and jumped up, got him in a bar arm, kicked, and boom, we went down. And he just, he broke 3 of my ribs. He was so big. And I'm trying to choke this monster out. And I know that if he doesn't go out, I am a dead man.
Yeah.
That's 100% true. So I was starting to, the lactic acid was starting to build up, and I'm starting to lose my grip. And I was scared to death. I really, really was. And then finally, he starts to go unconscious. I start to let go. Some people pull my arm off him, and he kind of collects himself. He walks out. We start hauling ass down to our boat, get the hell out of there. At which time we're hearing these blood-curdling screams that he's got a gun, he's got a gun. And we're out in the middle of nowhere. And damn sure, here he comes around the corner, and he's got a 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun. And he's running at a high port. And there were 3 of us right there, and some of the other people ran around the other side. And so he starts to level the shotgun to get his shot, and boom, we're into the water. And there we go. Freezing cold. Everybody was a little high. I was afraid, people were going to drown. And just then, this one girl that was with us, Dolores Holguin, that was with Dean Brinker, comes up, and she's completely hysterical. And she's screaming that Jerry's got Patty, that female officer. Unbeknownst to me, what had happened is that when we all ran out of the bar, they ran around to the back of the Moonshine Saloon. There was a big Dipsy dumpster there. And they basically hid behind that. And they seen him go to his truck, get that sawed-off shotgun, break it down, put in those 2 shotgun shells. And Patty was standing up, and she slipped, and she smacked her head against the back of the bar. He heard it. So he starts walking right for him, and they bolt. They go around the other side, away from him, and Patty starts running down the river. That's when she sees me, and she figured that, I'm sorry, that was Dolores, and Patty runs back into the bar. So she's screaming that, and I said to myself, this guy is so pissed off that he's gonna rape her, then he's gonna blow her brains out. And we didn't have cell phones, and there was a big trailer park there full of trailer trash, I might add. And so I'm knocking on these doors, and here I'm soaking wet, got full of blood, and finally this one door opens up, and I had my LAPD card, not my badge, and I identified myself. I gotta make an emergency call. They let me in. So I call up Yuma County Sheriff's, and I tell them in officers' vernacular exactly what's going on. Yeah, we've already got the call. We heard about the gun, so we're en route. Well, we're out in the middle of the desert. I don't know how long it's going to be, and this is active shooter sort of mentality, right? And I says, I can't live unless I go back there to try to render some aid, because I could just imagine what was going to happen to Patty. So I asked him if he had any firearms in the house, and he had a 30-30 rifle, lever action. And he gave it to me with 6 rounds, and I left him with I gave him my ID as collateral. I go back, and as I go back to see Mike Casadas, he's got a flashlight. And we went back, and we looked into the moonshine from the far side, nobody in there, and I could hear some talking, and we go to the other corner of the bar, which is in the back, and there's Helm and Woods, and they got their backs to us. But he's so big, I can't see if he's got the shooter in his hand. So I just did what I normally do back in LA, screamed with these vulgarities, and try to force him into cowing him to capitulate so that I don't have to shoot him. Well, he turns, and he hasn't got the shotgun. And he immediately gets down, and the other guy gets down. And then here comes Yuma County Sheriff's. So I get the rifle, set it down. Mike's got his badge, and he's going like this, showing everybody the badge. And the lead deputy, there were 3 agencies that rolled on it, by the way. And the lead deputy was from Yuma County Sheriff. And it was a female, and she had a shotgun. Her name was Deputy Lee. And we got close, she got close enough to Hallam. She screams to the other detectives, or I'm sorry, the other officers, it's Hallam, Crazy Jerry, because he had been giving them a lot of problems for months there, right? So they knew who it was. So she hands me the handcuffs, and I cuff him up. Game over. This guy's going back to the joint for the rest of his life, right? Attempted murder on policemen, and on and on and on. Well, his homies, his white supremacist people that were pissed off to all hell. And they start saying that I started the fight. They start saying that I pistol whipped him or hit him on the back of the head. And he's screaming, that I was beating him on the back of the head with the rifle. Now, the rifle had a metal butt plate. Now, and I know that if you were to stand over somebody, straddle over somebody, and you were smashing them on the back of the head with a metal butt plate of a rifle, I mean, you would crush the head. The head is very visceral, and there would be blood all over the place. There wasn't a scratch on him, except for the, bumps and bruises and cut nose and sore lip that he had. So Deputy Lee, at that time, Deputy Lee, he starts moving his hand. This is right before I cuffed him, by the way. And she drops to one knee and boom, hits him in the balls, because she thought he was going for a gun in his waistband. So she did the same exact thing I did, because I had to tap him one time too, and I tapped him on the shoulder. So I cuff him up, and I'm saying to myself, game over. But all of my party is gone, because Woody had picked all my LAPD group up, and he had taken them back over to where we were, initially where we met him. And he told everybody, get back to your campsite. I'll go back and find out what's going on with Al. So you have all of these dreadful white supremacists, members of the Aryan Brotherhood, all saying that I started the fight, and there's Hallam, and she didn't have anybody to basically, and by the way, Mike Casadas, he left. Big mistake. So he was also picked up by Woody, and that's when they all left on the boat. So I go, Al, we're going to have to take, this guy's under arrest, but we got to take you into custody, and we're going to take you to the station, and they were going to sort everything out. So she says, I wasn't arrested, but I was taken down there to make a statement. He was arrested and booked for attempted murder. So the following day, she cut me loose. They drove me back down to where we were staying over at Black Meadows. And the following day, Mike Casadas and Patty Fowler left. They didn't go back to give a statement. See, Mike Casadas had taken a 6-month suspension about a year prior for having sex with one of the Explorer Scouts there. Okay, conduct unbecoming an officer, big time. So and then now, a year later, he's at the Colorado River, he's married, and he's with his female probationer. And he's saying to himself, man, I'm gonna get fired. So that's why the hell he left. He screwed everything up. So the deputy was really, really pissed off. And, rightfully so, and I apologized, and I says, I'm gonna rain hell on him when I get him, and we will get him to give you a full. So anyhow, we went, everybody does their little statement, and then we go back, and then I wasn't gonna apprise the department of what happened. It's called a 15-7, it's a report, until I got Deputy Lee's report, because I knew that it was gonna favor me, or I should say it was gonna be the truth, because the lieutenant wanted my ass. And but Mike Casadas had already done a 3-page typed written statement, including everybody's name. And so that duty was basically satisfied with Mike Casadas' 15-7. And I knew that, but I was still going to submit my own 15-7 anyhow, in detail. So then I'm told that the lieutenant is just like how you feel after you've had some really good sex, right? I've got Moreno. So they give the 2 incidents to internal affairs. Internal affairs, the 2 detectives, Sewell and Lamb, were heard by one of the secretaries in IAD. She told the secretary of Crash what she heard these 2 detectives saying at the genesis of the investigation. Quote, we're going to fry Moreno's ass. Okay. And then the advocate that was going to put on the case for the department is a policeman in internal affairs. Dave Gossman, my old training officer from Bell, called me on the phone. He says, you know what, Al? He says, you're going to have to watch your butt, man, because they're going to have you. He's overheard saying that regardless of the evidence, Moreno's getting fired. So I was screwed. There was nothing independent about this whole investigation. And what it was is that the department had gone postal, because I had blown the whistle on this corruption, and there was going to be a board of inquiry. So I was sent to a trial board, and they had 9 different offenses. The department's 2 victims, one was a gang member from the Avenues, a murderer that was convicted for the murder and other previous shootings, and the other one was an Aryan brother. Now, these are the department's victims. And this monster, Helen, had just been paroled from the joint for cutting his wife's fingers off with an axe. She shot him, and he went at her with an axe. That's the caliber of people that the department said were hurt or offended by Officer Moreno. So it was a kangaroo court. I was done. And the guy that I picked to do my trial board, Hank Hernandez, was being a spot for lieutenant. And in the 7 months of investigation, he didn't interview but 1 person. He didn't go out to the river and get pictures and look for witnesses. In other words, he went in there cold. So the trial board lasted 3 days. And at the beginning of the trial board, they wanted to get a continuance for 16 days. And I had already been relieved from duty for about 3 weeks, no pay. So Hernandez did tell him, he said, look, the officers already suffered a great deal. He says, we're not going to go with, with this extension because they wanted more time to fly in all these white supremacists from Arizona on taxpayers' money to testify against me. And so they went back and forth, and then they settled for 6 of these people to come in, all white supremacists. And so they took the testimony of these people. Oh, by the way, during the Board of Rights, they brought up the fact that when Sewell and Lamb interviewed Crazy Jerry at his mother's house in Ontario, he told them to their face, I'm going to murder Officer Moreno. And I already know where he works because I got some buddies in La Ema, the Mexican Mafia, because they work together. And we know that he works juvenile problems. So he already made an overt act in the commission of killing somebody, attempted murder, except that he's not successful. So instead of internal affairs, those 2 investigators taking him into custody, he just copped it out right there. They didn't arrest him. And it's on page 63. All this insanity is documented, okay? So they discussed the threats against Officer Moreno. And there's a protocol that they didn't follow. No security for me or my family. And the 3 captains on the board, Bova, Hernandez, and Harbor, didn't do anything about it. No one did anything about it. They were told from up above, just let it go, man. He gets blown up, great. So in effect, the Los Angeles Police Department management sanctioned the Aryan Brotherhood to murder one of their own. And if I didn't have the documentation, everybody would say I was completely nuts, but I do. That whole time, what normally would happen is that internal affairs, oh, by the way, they did ask internal affairs, these 2 detectives, so, well, what did you do when you heard these, when you went back to the station, and what did you do about this information that Officer Moreno was going to be murdered? And he goes, well, I told my lieutenant, I told the captain. The captain notified Bureau, and the Bureau immediately ran it up to the 5th floor. No one did anything. I was scared to death, not so much for myself, but for my family.
Yeah.
I was scared to death.
I'm just going to drop something in here as well. I think the viewers need to know this.
Can you speak up a little bit? I can't hear you.
During your time in the Los Angeles Police Department, you received 71 commendations. That's how good you were at your job. So you weren't just average here. Let's just be honest. You were extremely good.
That was,
guys.
Yeah, that was at the 5.5-year juncture, I might add. And if a cop gets 20, 25 commendations in 20 years, he was a damn good street cop. I had gotten over 71 commendations at the 5.5-year juncture. But the thing that I'm proudest most about is that more than half of them were for arresting gang members and other suspects with guns. And in my rating report, it goes on to say, Officer Moreno recovers more firearms than anybody else in the unit, though has avoided an officer-involved shooting.
Yeah. So
I'm exactly the kind of cop that the public is screaming for. Yeah. And I got dumped. So, after the 3-day trial board, I was terminated for conduct on becoming an officer. And I lost my ski boat. I had to sell my Aston Martin, lost my incredible loft apartment, lost the money that I had put into the retirement. You don't get it when you get fired. Back then you didn't, okay? So I was back in the hood, living with mom and dad again, sleeping on the couch. And it was the same old shit. Nothing had changed there. These folks just blowing the hell out of each other just because somebody lives a couple blocks down the street or whatever.
Yeah.
So just to fast forward, we submitted it to the Superior Court, and the Superior Court sided with the department, including the appellate court. So there was one other thing that I could do for them to, because I had by then got a lot of information that was not, present there at the time. For example, like Officer Brinker was charged for not submitting a 15-7, just like I was, but he was found not guilty because my Casadas had already fulfilled that duty. Officer Brinker was charged with beating one of the suspects with a pool cue during that melee. Well, his lieutenant that did his administrative insight on his personnel complaint says, I'm not believing these monsters, these white supremacists, this gang, prison gang over my officers. And his allegation of misconduct came back unfounded. And by the way, 3 days after I was terminated, I went up to the academy to pick up some of my gear with Officer Brinker. And I'll be damned, who walks into there's a little bar they called the Embers Room. It was one of the three captains, Captain Rodriguez, and he was with Captain Kilgo from Robbery Homicide Division. And he had the temerity to actually come up to me after I got fired, right? And the lieutenant was his mouthpiece, and he says, Jess told me all about, referring to Captain Rodriguez, all about your, situation. So when you appeal it, make sure and say that you had an inadequate defense. And once Kilgo said that, Rodriguez says, listen to him. He knows what he's talking about. Those were his exact words. So I looked at the manual for what a board is supposed to do, what they can and can't do. And on page 43, it talks about how at any one time, if any one of the board members see that the officer is not getting an adequate defense, that they are duty bound to stop everything and until he gets, a favorable, representative. So obviously, if he felt that way, the other two captains felt that way as well. And but the word was already out. I was done. And by the way, after I was terminated, 3 days later, Commander Croker was administratively transferred from the commander of Central Bureaus over to some other agency over in Parker Center, and that investigation was gone, nothing. So I applied for 22 police departments, 5 fire departments, and I was getting nowhere. Then I was shocked when I got a call from Culver City PD, one of the cities in Los Angeles County, one of the 88 cities. And it's kind of a little sleepy, hollow little place. But the captain, the chief was Cook. And he was actually a prior Los Angeles police captain. And he applied for their chief position. And he basically looked at the investigation, looked at my commendations, looked at my rating reports. I walked on water. No prior allegations of any misconduct with the public. None. Zero. So they hired me over 9 other officers. It was a lateral transfer where they needed a copper now, not somebody they needed to train. And I was the only one that had to basically overcome this termination. But when they did their own investigation, plus the polygraph test that they gave me, I came out clean, obviously. And then just recently, I took another polygraph, just to kind of update it with one of the premier polygraph examiners in the United States, Joe Gallia. Dahlia, I believe his last name is. And again, I came out, truthful. And I submitted everything via what they call a request for rehearing. And that's when you get new evidence, like some of the stuff that I'm talking about here, and submitted it to every single chief of police. Every time there's a new chief of police, to date, and boo, nothing. And about 2 years ago, I went before the city council, there's 15 members, and it's called a 2-minute kind of speaking engagement where you can basically, talk to, to the city council. And I was able to actually get that whole story into 2 minutes because you only got 2 minutes. Then I gave them each a copy of the request for rehearing with all the evidence. I also took a copy of it to Mayor Villalagosa's office and then to Garcetti's office. And I haven't heard boo from anybody. They don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Now, granted that these people that are in office here today had nothing to do with this. However, when they see the evidence of what I presented to them, they have fiduciary and moral responsibility to open up this file and make this horrendous wrong right.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, pretty well my overview, for the exception of a lament. Officer Bill Wong, that treasured soul, became part of the family. I would have dinner at his house in Montebello, old school Chinese, where you take off your shoes, you walk in, very courteous, spotless, wonderful meals. He would come over to the hood and mom would fix some really great meals. So he was like truly part of the family. We went to Mexico a few times together. You know how close you get with your brothers, right? So, but in 1983, it was October the 29th, 1983. I get a call from Officer Dean Brinker, and he told that Bill had just been killed. What had happened is Bill and his partner, Art Suhu, still working Crash. By the way, I'm the one that encouraged Bill to leave Northeast and come into Crash, to OCB Crash. So it's really kind of when you look at how one thing kind of, lures another thing to happen in this world.
Yeah.
And initially, I did feel kind of like that I was kind of at fault for having him come over to Crash, because he wouldn't be dead today if he hadn't met Bill Moreno or come to Crash. So Art Suhu and Bill Wong were, working the gang, and they're working the Tongs and the Triad gangs in Chinatown. And they were crossing an intersection on College at Broadway. They got locked in on Friday night traffic, and here comes this vehicle, 70 miles an hour, hits them perfectly in the center and crushes the vehicle like an accordion. Killed them both instantly. The suspects that were driving it were 3 illegal aliens from Mexico. One of them stayed there and they took him into custody, the guy that was in the right rear seat. The driver of the car flew to Mexico, or to Tijuana, and him and the other suspect were members of the Sinaloa drug cartel, because they were arrested in Mexico, but they coughed them up because of the corruption. So in 2007, they actually got the other suspect, the right front passenger. He was living here in Northern California under an assumed name, living a whole life. And they took him into custody, gave him 18 months, cut him loose. Los Angeles Police Department, in my opinion, has not done and pursued this. In fact, I called robbery homicide every few years to find out if there's any news, and hell, the people that I'm talking with never even heard of Bill Wong or Suhu. It just doesn't set the kind of tone for officers throughout the United States that if you come from another country, or in this case, Mexico, you're part of a drug cartel and you murder 1 or 2 of our officers and you just run back to your country, it's no problem. That's the message that it sends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wrong message, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay. That'll tell you one thing. I think everyone's going to be a bit like me, just sat there thinking, wow, we've spoken a lot anyway, and yeah, you've been through a hell of a lot. Now, your book, what's it called, and where can people find it, buy it, and read it?
Anybody can get it through Amazon. Okay, just type in LA's Last Street Cop, and you get it in a couple of days. And it's also on Kindle. And here next month, it's also going to be on audiobooks. So, like I mentioned a little before, what it is, it's just not about Al Moreno, but the book is so well documented because basically it's derived from the Los Angeles Police Department's own records, commendations, rating reports, personnel complaints, Board of Rights, the material, the internal affairs. So I just put everything in sequence, but it also speaks of the insane sacrifice that are men and women in uniform and what they go through for their communities every day.
Yeah.
And then the way they're being treated today is just breaks my heart. The police in the United States have been ordered by their mayors and governors and chiefs of police to stand down. Meanwhile, crime throughout the United States is just going completely mad. I got this one document here from the Los Angeles Police Protective League, and it's basically addressing what's going on to the Board of Police Commissioners. And this is dated November the 16th, 2020, a couple, 2-3 months ago. And it's just kind of an update on what the crime scene here is in Los Angeles. And homicides are up 25%, shootings are up 30%, shots fired, generic shots fired, up 28%. Gang-related murders are up 22%. Don't you believe that for a second? Because it's got to be double that if this is what they're putting down. Carjackings are up 18%. Shooting into inhabited dwellings are up 41%. And the people that are get hit by most are the people of color that need law enforcement more than anything else. But they've defunded the Los Angeles Police Department by $150 million. New York PD was defunded by over $1 billion. Well, the walls of Jericho are falling.
Yeah.
The bad guys are just having the time of their lives.
Yeah, I think those statistics you've just given us there, someone needs to wake up and deal with this. The boys and girls, men and women of the police departments in all of the states, the United States, need support, because the criminal element of things now and the links between organized crime and terrorist organizations as well, they are getting to be a problem, a big one at this moment in time. But Al, we can speak about this for hours and hours, okay? Because it's just great to be able to speak to someone with your experience as well. You've been through so much anyway. People read the book. It's incredible, okay? You can learn a lot from Al's experiences. Al, would you like to say anything else before I close the interview down?
No, obviously, I hope that the public gets the book so that they'll get a true, visceral, documented picture of what, like I said, it is just about Al Moreno. It's about what law enforcement does, 24/7 for all the communities throughout the United States. And it will give them a detailed insight of why police do what they do and what kind of sacrifices that they're doing for their public. And of course, it's going to also focus on my story as well. So I sincerely appreciate you, Anthony, giving me, the opportunity on your show to basically speak of this story. And again, I just want to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Al, it's an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you in person in the not too distant future. Okay, everybody, that's the interview. Wow, what can I say? You might want to grab yourself a coffee and we'll watch it again when you get the time. Right, thank you.
I think we need a beer on this one here.
I need a beer as well. Thank you for watching the Patriot Show. Hope it's been, as always, informative. And I hope you've enjoyed watching it. I hope you can take something from this interview as well. Thank you.
Also, give Mac a holler. I've seen the work that he's done. I believe that's his name, right, Mac?
Yeah.
The gentleman that does the graphics and what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Please tell him that I was really, really, really pleased. The folks that are looking at his work, it's just absolutely phenomenal. So make sure and shout out to him hello for me. And I hope to maybe get an email from you every once in a while, just what's going on and what have you. And I really look forward to us getting together and knocking down a couple of beers, okay?
Gold ones, absolutely. No problems at all. Okay, everybody, thank you for watching the Patriot Show. Stay safe wherever you are. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye, Anthony.